Hi everybody, I hope you had a lovely Christmas and are enjoying a nice relaxing Boxing Day. Greg Rust and Greg Murphy with you for another edition of the Speed Cafe Summer Grill, where we canvass and cover all kinds of issues in motorsport over the 2020-2021 summer season, all brought to you by our great friends at KTM Motorcycles. For this episode, we're going to focus on Formula One and specifically what was meant to be the opening round of the 2020 season. Unprecedented circumstances with COVID-19 forcing the cancellation of the Australian Grand Prix. It was wild. Mat Coch is going to join us as well. He loves his Formula One. And Matt, I don't recall a press conference like that ever.
It was absolutely extraordinary. It's one of the most bizarre weekends I've ever experienced, and I've been in this game for more years than I care to admit. But to have Chase Carey, Michael Massey, Andrew Westacott all lined up in front of the throngs of press from around the world, not just local, not just national, but global audiences focused in on the unfolding events and the cancellation of a Grand Prix just hours before the opening practice session was set to get underway. It was extraordinary, and the response from Chase Carey was, you could have knocked me over with a feather. It was one of the most bizarre experiences I think I will ever have in this industry.
I think we could say a lot of things with hindsight now. I think some people sort of, at the time, perhaps thought it was an almost farcical set of circumstances. But for me, it was far from that, because COVID was still relatively new. We didn't know the ways to necessarily handle or deal with it. Yes, what had happened in the paddock was a very minor case, but we're talking about how to deal with it now, armed with all this knowledge. We didn't have that back in March, did we?
Yeah, we're the better part of 12 months on, we're still dealing and grappling with this pandemic. It was very new at that point. There had been some concerns in Europe. Melbourne had held some large events just a week before the Australian Grand Prix. But for me, one of the big things, and one of the reasons things really spiraled as they did, was that Chase Carey was on a plane coming back from Vietnam to Melbourne. He wasn't even in the country when the decision was made. The head of Formula One, the man who ultimately has the final decision, was uncontactable. He didn't have internet, he didn't have phone. He was at 40,000 feet with, as far as we know, his feet up, blissfully unaware of what was unfolding in Melbourne. So it was an extraordinary sequence of events. I think the lesson here is that really your key stakeholders need to be there for day one so that they can have their input, because that delay is really what exacerbated things. It took the better part of 12 hours for a decision to be made, and that's what really made it look as bad as it was.
At what point during the lead up and the week leading up to it, what point did things sort of change from, sort of, yes, COVID is a bit of a question mark, but it wasn't being taken too serious, to the point where it all of a sudden, the reality of the potential of an event, the opening event for the Formula One calendar, being cancelled? When did it really start to sink in for those around where you were and in the paddock? When did it sort of really get to a point where you go, this is serious?
The whole weekend felt different from the moment we walked into the circuit to the moment that we left on the Friday afternoon, or Friday evening as it ended up being. There were concerns about COVID in the paddock. Formula One had taken precautions, and we couldn't get up close and personal like we normally would with the drivers and team bosses in the paddock. They'd put tables and had other social distancing measures in place. For me, the key moment, the point where I started to think that, oh my, this is going south, is I saw a photographer in the International Media Centre being escorted out of the circuit. Basically, they was having masks fitted, security was there. He went off into quarantine as a result of symptoms that were consistent with COVID-19. That was midway through the Thursday, and we reported on that on speedcafe.com. Then some 6 or 8 hours later, that McLaren announced that it had its own problems within the team, and that's the point where it really all fell over. From at 10 o'clock at night on Thursday night, it was an extraordinary 24-hour period. It was an extraordinary 12-hour period where the European press was stating that the event was gone, the event was done. And then the next morning, we've got the Australian Grand Prix Corporation coming out and saying, no, it's still coming, still turn up to the track, the gates will open at normal times. Well, they didn't. And at that point, I don't think a decision had still yet been made. And conversation had been going on since the previous night, since some 10 o'clock or thereabouts, with Ross Brawn from Formula One, with the Australian Grand Prix Corporation. It was just extraordinary, and just that cascade of events, really from midway through Thursday, it really quickly followed thereafter. It was a bit like a runaway train, but from the moment we walked into the circuit on the Wednesday, it was a strange event.
That press conference is one, as I said at the beginning, that I'll never forget. I mean, to have a helicopter flying overhead, a huge cast of journalists in a not a scrum per se, but all gathered round the representatives from all the key stakeholders in the sport was unprecedented. Could we have done anything to at least get the race to happen in your mind? And I know I'm asking that now with months of hindsight, Matt.
The problem is McLaren had withdrawn at that point. It had a positive COVID result. As a result, a number of other mechanics in that team had to go into quarantine. It wasn't in a position to field cars, so it had withdrawn. The event, in theory, could have gone ahead. We have had events in the past where teams haven't shown up for one of a number of reasons. You just think back to Indianapolis a few years ago. But at that point, I think the horse has bolted. You've got to just shut it down, accept that Formula One can't go ahead at that point. There's too many unknowns, particularly given that we didn't have bubbles. We didn't know who else might have been infected at that point. If we'd have carried on, we might have seen a lot more positive results. We didn't have the testing processes involved back then either. So it was a huge risk. I think it was the right decision to make. It was a tough decision to make, and the timing of it was probably wrong, but it was the right decision to make. It just came 12 hours too late.
How easy is it going to be to have the season opener in 2021 in Melbourne?
That's a very good question, and sitting here, we honestly can't answer that. This is a moving target. We've learnt a lot over the last 8, 9, 10 months, but we still don't know how things are going to unfold. International travel remains a concern. Community transmission remains a concern. Even though the numbers have dropped significantly, it's a big deal. Mass gatherings are still an issue. So the good thing, what is in favour for Albert Park, is that they've got some 10 or nearly 11 kilometres worth of real estate that they can spread the crowd around. So that's great. The issue is really the arriving teams and how we manage that from a biosphere, I guess, perspective, whether we put them in a bubble, how that is managed. Also the local officials, don't forget that. We're asking a lot of those guys, they're volunteering their time as it is, and they might have to go into quarantine. So we can't underestimate that impact. It's not going to be an easy solution. I believe that the players involved are working towards a solution, and there's serious appetite to have Formula One kickstart its 2021 season in Melbourne, and I'm confident that will happen. But there's a lot of unanswered questions at this point that need to have solutions found. And at this point, I don't have the solutions. We need to find someone that does.
It's been a lot of learnings over the last 12 months, and that will continue over summer, no doubt. Let's hope, fingers crossed, that we can get the traditional season opener at Albert Park done, an Australian Grand Prix. Matt, we would love that. Let's hope.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rusty.
There he is, Mat Coch, and we will be back with another episode of the speedcafe.com Summer Grill real soon, brought to you by our great friends at KTM. KTM are giving away some awesome summer essentials each week. Stay cool with a KTM Powerwear pack featuring a shirt, cap, thongs or jandals, sunglasses and lanyard. To enter the draw, all you need to do is subscribe to Speed Cafe in the sign up box below this video. It is that easy. And we'll have another episode of the KTM Summer Grill for you tomorrow. Stay tuned.